It began on Saturday night. Well, actually, very early Sunday morning, on July 23rd, 1967, when suddenly a couple of Detroit neighbors who were celebrating the return of two Vietnam veterans were violently interrupted when the door to the blind pig they were celebrating in was kicked down. This was the start of the pinnacle and the bloodiest event of the long, hot summer of '67. Some might call this the Riots of Detroit in 1967. Others might call it the Rebellion of Detroit, but it is most commonly known as the 12th Street Riots. As Ken Haddad with Click on Detroit remembers, 43 people died on those fateful 5 days and over thousands more were injured. This civil unrest was the boiling point of many economic tensions, like underemployment and unemployment. But they might have been solved had the 1968 Olympics been hosted in Detroit. The logistics and preparations for hosting the Olympics are a massive undertaking and demand a huge economic toll on the city. But they also return a huge amount of funds to the host city. Vast amounts of property, tools, and materials would have been needed. But also, most importantly, tons of jobs would have been required. And it just so happens that this economic stimuli and demand is just what Detroit needed at the time. For instance, the 110,000 seat arena that historian Zach Stanton has discovered would have provided hundreds upon thousands of jobs for Detroit citizens. Just imagine all the families that could be financially boosted by that. Just imagine all the families that could have been financially boosted by this. Of course, the athletes, coaches, and officials would have required a place to live during the games. According to the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit Olympic Committee proposed building a 340-acre housing complex on Wayne State's campus. All this would have added $57 million to the economy of Detroit. Now, the 8 Mile Road Olympic Stadium is a long way from Wayne State. So to solve this, the DOC would have built a monorail system, much similar to the 1984 Detroit People Mover, but way better. While there are no plans or blueprints for building this gigantic system, there are artistic renderings which depict a two-railed system that historians like Zach Stanton can use to imagine a 16-mile monorail snaking all the way from Wayne State's housing complex to the Olympic Stadium at 8 Mile and Woodward. Of course, it's difficult to estimate the cost of this project, but in comparison to the Detroit People Mover, which cost $210 million to build, this Olympic monorail, which would have been 5.5 times larger, would have been substantially more economically influential. All of this Olympic stuff and economic stimuli would have been imperative to the prevention of the 12th Street Riot. But in 1963, the International Olympic Committee had a tough decision to make. The Detroit Free Press observes that the top 4 cities to host the '68 Summer Olympics were Buenos Aires, Lyon, Detroit, and Mexico City. But the determining factor, believe it or not, were lunches. Detroit wanted to provide a lunch that was just mere cents more expensive than the lunch that Mexico City would have provided. And thus, it lost its 8th and final bid to host the Olympics. So, in the end, Detroit did not host the 1968 Summer Olympics, and since then they never have. But how would history change if they did?